So Transformers 1 was directed by Josh Cooley and it stars Chris Hemsworth, Brian Tyree Henry, Keegan-Michael Key, Scarlett Johansson, John Hamm, Steve Buscemi, and Lawrence Fishburne. And taking place on the planet Cybertron, these two robots named Orion Pax and D16, they're friends, they're basically brothers, and they wind up uncovering a very serious situation going on in Cybertron, and they wind up getting these powers where they can transform into various vehicles and such, and now they must take on whatever's going on in Cybertron and basically change the course of Cybertron as well as the course of their friendship. This was a movie that admittedly I was not looking forward to. I saw the trailer and I'm like, no, I am not looking forward to that movie. It didn't look funny, it looked pretty bad. The animation didn't look that great, if I'm being honest. And I thought, like, I don't want to sit through another Transformers movie, even if it is animated. Like, I sat through so many of them. The first Transformers movie, in my opinion, it's a guilty pleasure. Like, I know it's not great, but the other movies are just guilty. So I was not looking forward to this movie one bit. But I still gave it a chance, mainly because I heard so many people were saying that this movie was actually good. This movie was actually entertaining. And it may, in fact, be the best Transformers movie yet. And honestly, after seeing it, I can say, yeah, this movie was actually surprisingly good. I'm actually really surprised by how much I enjoyed this movie. I think I enjoyed this more than any of the other Transformers movies, at least since the 2007 one. So, what's good about this movie? First off, I thought the animation was really good. The look of Cybertron is very well done and very well realized. I'm like, this is really well done. There's so much creativity going on in the various landscapes in this movie. I'm like, that's very well done. That's very interesting. And it's like, I'm kind of glad they didn't show that in the trailer because I'm like, that would have given... I feel like I would have been a little disappointed if I saw that in the trailer, but like having known as like the trailers weren't that great and seeing all the animated sequences, like that's very well done. Meanwhile, some of the action sequences are surprisingly well done as well. There's one that's involving a race I thought was very fun and very chaotic, but I thought it was very well done. And they kind of get better like when they get into the battles and such, especially after they get their powers and such. That's very interesting. And also, the voice acting surprisingly is pretty good, particularly from the two leads, Chris Hemsworth and Brian Tyree Henry. Brian Tyree Henry is surprisingly incredible in this movie. I believed his character. I believed his arc throughout the entire movie. He does a really good job with it. Chris Hemsworth kind of surprised me too. I kind of thought when he was cast as Optimus Prime, I thought it was more stunt casting more than anything. Like, don't get me wrong, Chris Hemsworth can be really cool and such, but I thought it was more stunt casting because, like, you know, I had him and also Scarlett Johansson a bit. But he does a really good job as Orion Pax in this movie. The other voice actors are good, but some don't really stand out as well. Keegan-Michael Key has a few funny lines here and there, but I'll kind of talk about him in a little bit. Meanwhile, it is a pretty fun movie. It is a pretty funny movie as well. There are times where I'm watching this movie and thinking, this is actually pretty solid. I'm actually having a really good time. And also, there are some jokes in this movie where they kind of caught me off guard. They were surprisingly well edited, and it's like, or they were really well timed, and I'm like, am I laughing during a Transformers movie? And they were actually funny? Huh. I never expected that from a movie like this. And also, I do think the short runtime actually does help this movie a lot. These Transformers movies constantly try to push themselves to be at least 2.5 hours, and it's just way too much at times. This movie is a little over 100 minutes, and I think for that, it's pretty effective, and they surprisingly cram a lot into 100 minutes, which I'm like, thankfully, they actually do that instead of try to stretch this thing out like the other Transformers movies. And also, I do think that the dramatic scenes actually are effective in this movie too, surprisingly. Again, I would not expect that from a Transformers movie. And I do think they are very effective. They are intense, particularly Brian Tyree Henry in the last act of the movie. He sells this movie in the last third. I'm like, wow, I'm really surprised by how much they kind of cram into this movie, how everything kind of like builds up. And I'm like, I actually kind of feel sad during this movie at times too. It's actually very well done again. And I do think this movie is very interesting because, like, this movie seems like it's more targeted towards, like, you know, young kids and families and such. But I feel like it's a lot more adult than some of the other Transformers movies of the past. Like, I feel like, yeah, those were, you know, PG-13 and such, but those movies are childish compared to this. And I feel like, again, it kind of goes back to my criticism about, like, people who make fun of kids movies and such, saying, you know, who cares about kids movies? You don't really try. This movie surprisingly tried, and I didn't think it needed to, but it did. And I'm like, wow, you're more grown up than some movies that are actually targeted for grown-ups. And I'm really surprised by that. But let's talk about some things I don't really care for in this movie. Even though some of the action sequences are pretty well done, I thought the editing at times was not particularly great. Like, they kind of cut around the action sequences at times, and it's like, you do realize you're an animated movie. You can do whatever you want. You can make things look however you want. Instead, they kind of choose to make some sequences go by really fast, and like, it's a little hard to tell at times, like, what's really going on. I mean, I get what's going on, but at the same time, you don't have to cut around so much. And I think some jokes do fall flat a bit. Keegan-Michael Key, as I mentioned, he is the main comedic foil throughout this entire movie, and his jokes are kind of hit and miss. You're either going to really love his character or really hate his character, and I came close to really hating his character. He kind of repeats a lot of the same jokes. He has some jokes that are just kind of odd. Don't get me wrong, he has some jokes that are really funny. And I feel bad because I like Keegan-Michael Key. I think he can be really funny, but his character, I almost wanted to say he's awful, but like, hey, he's not as bad as Jack Black in Borderlands, so I'll give him that. And also, I do think that, like, again, this movie is very well done. I'm actually really glad that I got a chance to see this movie. The animation is very well done. The action sequences are pretty good. The voice acting is decent. It is fun and funny overall, but doesn't escape from the overall darker side of this movie, like what may happen in some of these later movies and such. It's short compared to the other Transformers movies, and again, I had a good time watching it. And even though some editing I don't really care for, and some jokes I think kind of fall flat, I would still recommend this movie. I do think that this is definitely a lot more fun than the other Transformers movies, and I would say surprisingly more adult. So for that reason, I will give it 3 out of 4 stars. See it. So, what did you think of Transformers 1? And also, how do you feel about the Transformers movies in general? The Michael Bay ones, this one, the 80s movie, the cartoon and such. What do you think? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe. Autobots, roll out.